Colleen Athparia is an internationally recognized pianist and recording artist with 10 CDs to her name. She has toured as a performer and guest instructor from Mexico to Taiwan, Russia, Israel, Brazil, and the Far East. Before earning a Master of Music degree with distinction from Indiana University, she was awarded the Gold Medal for Ontario and placed first in the Canadian music competition. A renowned teacher, her studio features many extremely talented students, two of whom were listed in CBC's Top 30 Classical Musicians in Canada, and one in BBC Music Magazine's 6 Best Child Prodigies in 2016. In 2017, she was honored nationally by the Royal Conservatory as a Teacher of Distinction. A frequent guest on CBC Radio, Athparia has been heralded by the National Post as one of the top 4 Canadian pianists of contemporary music today. Colleen, the stage is yours. Colleen, you're muted.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Jerry, for organizing this online presentation to all of you young teachers and teachers. There's always so much to learn. I keep learning every day as I teach. So, by the way, I am right now in France, so I hope the connection is good. Let me know if you have any trouble hearing me, but glad to be with you today. So I'd like to just share a few tips just on one of the most important things, and that is practicing, especially for students. When you think of it, most of the time we spend at the piano is really playing or practicing. It's not really performing. And I always tell my students that 6 days a week, you are your own teacher. So I think it's really important what we do apart from our lesson. And as teachers, we can really help our students, give them some guidance. So practicing is really a process. It's like learning how to study. And it takes practice to learn how to practice well. Parents are always asking, and I'm sure you've had this question many times, how long should my child practice? And I always stress that it's the quality of practice, not the quantity, because students can easily spend half hour, 45 minutes, but not really accomplish anything. And actually they can get worse rather than better if they're not engaged and so on. So quality is really important, and it's very hard to gauge the quality because even as parents, and I'll get into that in a moment, how parents can help, as Alan was saying earlier. So good practicing really needs a purpose. You need to strive to do something that's a little bit out of reach, to kind of push your limits. And when I was young, I used to figure skate, and I used to watch the very best skaters who went on to the Canadian Nationals and so on. The really best ones were the ones who fell the most often. And at first I was really surprised at that, but I realized later that they were always pushing their limits, trying to go just a little bit beyond what they knew they could do. And so I think in practicing, it's really important to also just aim to do something that's just a little bit out of reach. And just thinking of practicing, it's not a means to an end. It's not really a goal, but it should be a creative and a worthwhile process in itself. And so today I'd just like to share a few tips how to make practicing a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more creative, so that students can really use it effectively to progress. So first of all, let's talk about when to practice. It's very important to establish a routine and choose a time when your mind is not so cluttered. So for most people, that's either first thing in the morning or kind of last thing in the evening, when you're not busy thinking about so many things. As parents or as teachers, always remember that your students' best time may not be the same as yours. And so for young children, usually morning is usually good, but not always, right? And I think also it's important to have a break in the middle, but not to lose focus. So 2 practice sessions that are shorter, I find work best if that can be worked into their routine. Try not to practice when you're physically or mentally tired, because it's just kind of it's frustrating for the student, and it doesn't really help them progress. So sometimes it's better if they're super tired, just to try another time, or maybe take a little break, or have a little snack. Try to practice later. They say that by the next day after sleeping, we forget about 2/3 of what we learned the day before, which is kind of a scary thought when you think about it. But I always encourage my students to practice right after their lesson, or at least a very short practice, just to kind of recap what they remember. And this could be even on the way home from the lesson, if the parent asks them, what did your teacher say about this particular piece, or just try to remember a few things, and maybe even 5 minutes at home before they sleep. When I grew up in Toronto, I used to spend 1 hour each way going to my piano lessons. So on the way to my lesson, I would sort of practice in my head mentally, thinking about what I was going to do. And then after my lesson, I would have another hour on the way home to think about what my teacher said and how I was going to practice. So that when I got to the piano, it didn't take as much time, because I had it already figured out in my head. So anyway, it's important to try to help your students find a time and a routine that works on a regular basis, with the help of their parents, of course. The next topic I'd like to talk about is how to organize their practice. So after they've figured out a time to do it, it's important to set some short-term and some long-term goals. So for short-term, maybe even a daily goal. Like today, I would like to improve that one piece that didn't go so well, or maybe it's a new piece. I want to learn maybe to the end, or I want to learn to a certain spot in the piece, or I want to learn hands together. And then maybe a weekly goal, so the teacher can help with this. By next week, I would like you to be able to play your scale hands together, or do your arpeggio, or I'd like you to learn this new piece, or whatever, but kind of something short term. Then long-term goals are good for you as a teacher, and also for parents, to kind of say, okay, between beginning of September and Christmas, I'd like this student to be able to do certain skills, or perhaps get to a certain point in their reading or their playing level, or a certain distance in their beginner book or whatever. And then you could have a long-term goal maybe for the whole year as well. And then just to check in once in a while to follow up to see if you're kind of on track, and it kind of helps you be organized as a teacher as well. Now I'd like to mention how important it is for parents to help out. And Alan mentioned this earlier. They can provide a routine in terms of scheduling. And of course, they can give lots of encouragement. And I think they can also help to find kind of a quiet, uncluttered space. Sometimes living rooms are just too busy. There's too much activity, too much noise, and students have trouble concentrating. So perhaps think about which room in the home you want to have the piano, for example. Sometimes it's nice to have it in the living room, but maybe that's not the best spot to be able to concentrate. And most of all, parents can really help setting an example. So, for example, if they want to pick up another instrument, if the child sees a parent practicing, it's the very best motivation you can give them. So parents can help just kind of keep them on track, and kind of following the teacher's suggestions, as again Alan was mentioning. their book. Now, if you think about what order to practice, there's many possibilities. I know Alan mentioned starting always with scales and technique, and that's what I do. And a lot of students find it kind of an orderly way, kind of warms up your hands, warms up your brain, and so on. Kind of sets a good start. But some students, it's easier for them to get into practicing if they play a familiar piece first. So maybe something they know well that just helps them kind of zone in. Some people like to sit down and just improvise, and that's also important. And so just sitting down and playing, kind of letting your hands walk on the piano is a wonderful way to sort of transform from what you've been doing previously into the practice mode. So I think every student's different, but if you can find kind of a routine and a pattern that works for you, that's great. And I try my best, and it takes time in the lesson, but I try to write down in the music dictation book carefully, not just what pieces to practice, but how to practice. And so, for example, if you write down a certain scale, and then you could write down different ways that they should practice it. I'll get into that later. And then have kind of a separate column for each different way so they can check it off. Or practicing a certain piece, how you want them to practice it, like hands separately, emphasizing the dynamics, with the pedal, without the pedal, with following the expression marks, many different things. But the more specific you can be in their dictation book, I find the easier it is to help them organize their practice. And it also helps parents be able to follow along. Did you remember to do this? And so on. So that's really important. So that's all kind of a way of organizing their practice. Now, let's go on to some of the ingredients for really effective practicing. As I mentioned before, it's really important to be aware and awake. So we've talked about being awake, trying to practice when you're not physically or mentally too tired. Being aware means also being aware of your body. Do you feel stiff? Do you have any pain in your neck, your shoulders? Tension's always a symptom that something's a little bit out of balance, and you want to be aware of that. You also want to be aware of the feeling of the keys. Sometimes we just take it for granted, especially as teachers. We've played the piano for so many years, but just to be aware of the feeling of depressing the keys, listening to the sound, listening to how we feel about the sound. And that's really important. And also being aware, is our mind really cluttered and jumping all over the place? Or, are we afraid of certain things? Like some children are really afraid of playing the wrong notes. And so they're terribly fearful. And some children lack confidence. So again, as teachers, trying to be aware of each student and how they, what their awareness level is. Secondly, concentration, as we know, is extremely important and sometimes very difficult to get children to concentrate. One thing that I found from teaching for the length of time I have, many years, is that if they can listen to one thing at a time to improve, it really helps them concentrate. So as a teacher, it's easy to kind of throw a lot of things at them, fix the F sharps, get your left hand softer here, don't forget the pedal there, this is supposed to be loud, and many things. And sometimes it's best when you're practicing just to take one thing at a time and say, okay, I'm going to just focus on, could be my pedal, or it could be on my dynamics, or could just be I'm concentrating on all my E flats and so on. And that really helps. Then they can go on and emphasize another one as secondly. Thirdly, it takes effort, as we know. Practicing is not always easy. It's not always the most natural thing. It takes a lot of effort to remember to correct a wrong note, for example. If we have a bad habit of playing wrong notes or something that's not correct, it takes a lot of effort to mentally make that change. But, it doesn't really take much effort to depress the keys. In many ways, we play one of the easiest instruments. I tell children, we just use gravity. All we have to do is let the gravity allow our finger to depress the key to the bottom. And so some students overwork and they, use much more effort than is needed. They say it only takes really 50 grams of pressure to depress the keys, much less than you would think. Bach said once that all you have to do is play the right notes at the right time. And it sounds so simple, but he's right. I mean, it's true. But of course, it's not as easy as that, right? So most of the effort required is mental effort to change the way we think or the way we listen to something. And fourthly, attitude towards practicing. There are different kinds of students. There are some that are like absolute perfectionists. And for them, they get so frustrated if it's not absolutely perfected. And for them, they have to sometimes be a little bit more forgiving, allow themselves to make mistakes, to feel like it's normal to make mistakes. And sometimes when we make mistakes, it's a sign that we're changing something. Maybe a mistake happens because we're thinking about making our left hand softer, or we're thinking more about the dynamics. And then as a result, we might play a wrong note. So sometimes mistakes are not necessarily bad. Then there's the opposite end of the perfectionist. There's the students that are very easygoing, kind of whatever. It doesn't matter if I play a mistake, I can always fix it later. All I got to do is get through this, So for them, you need to really, I'll give you some tips in a moment of how to help them practice. But I think the most important thing is really in our attitude to try to get rid of any fear or worry by doing really effective practicing, so that you're not worried about playing mistakes or whatever. And I think it's important to have short-term goals so you feel some success, so that by the end of the week, you feel like you've really made some progress. That's really important. So first of all, we've talked about when to practice, kind of how to practice and how to concentrate and so on. So I'd like just to give you a few tips on how to warm up. And pianists, we often just sit down at the piano and play. But most instruments, especially singers, always have to do warm-ups. And I compare this with sports players. Sports players always do warm-ups before a game. So there are a couple of things you can do. One that I've learned recently from a colleague of mine who is a dance instructor, and it's something called brain gym. And he stresses 4 things. One is always have a drink of water. It just helps the neurons in the brain get flowing. It helps us be much more alert. And a lot of students actually get really tired because they're dehydrated. So it's very simple, but just having a glass of water before your lesson, before you practice is a great thing. Second thing he does is it's called cross crawls. So you touch your right hand with some part of your left body. So it could be your right hand on your left knee, and then vice versa. So it's like when babies crawl, they're always using like their left arm and their left leg. and then their right arm and their left leg. So it's any kind of cross movement. And you can do it with your legs. You can right hand could touch your left foot, and then your left hand touch your right foot. Or you could put your foot behind you. So it's just kind of a cross movement, and it gets both sides of the brain working. And then the last thing he does, I don't know if you can see me on the screen because we're screen sharing, but anyway, you basically cross your ankles, you're standing, and just try to balance yourself. And that helps you feel kind of grounded. I've tried doing this recently with students, and I find a few of them, it's made a huge difference. So just the water, the cross movement, and then the being grounded, balancing yourself. Another thing you can do are stretches, touch the ceiling, touch the floor. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to let you know that everyone can see your screen. So if you want to demonstrate anything, go ahead.
Oh, they can. Okay. Yes. Thanks, Jerry. Yeah. Okay. All right. So that what I was talking about with the balance, you would cross your hands like this, and then like this, while you're standing with your legs crossed. Okay. So it's just kind of a way of finding your balance and feeling grounded. Okay. All right. Stretches. You can stretch, of course, your neck. We often, as pianists, get stiff in our neck. So you can, look sideways and gradually scan the horizon to the other side. And then do the same thing back and forth. So again, also looking distance and looking close is really good. Sometimes students, their eyes get tired. So it's really good to just sometimes look out the window, just to kind of change your focus. Okay, but any kind of stretches, depending on the age of the students, it's just really good just to kind of be loose. And the more you can move, I find, the better. So especially with young children, and I'm assuming that a lot of you are teaching young children, if you can get them to dance while you perhaps play their piece, sometimes stand while they're playing, so that a little bit more of their whole body, and I'm not saying all the time, I'm just saying once in a while, just to perhaps stand while you're playing, or to conduct. And it doesn't have to be in any particular pattern, but you could show them, if you want, a march would be down, up, with their both arms. So it's kind of like a J motion, or a waltz would be down and then to the out and then up. Okay, and sometimes just moving their body, feeling the music, is one of the best ways of internalizing it, because sometimes we feel a little bit constricted sitting at the piano, and we're told to keep our posture, back straight, etc. And sometimes it can be kind of inhibiting. And if you really want the music to flow through, one of the best ways is to move to music. So we can't jump around while we're playing. We can't walk while we're playing. But when you're practicing, once in a while, you can move, and you can listen to music and you can move. And so I think it's really important to move. And as most people who teach young children know, the more children can move, the more they internalize the rhythm. Speaking of posture, be careful that students don't sit too close to the piano, because sometimes I find as they grow, the piano gets kind of stuck in the carpet, the little grooves where it's been since they were maybe 5 years old. And so they end up kind of being a little bit constricted. I always feel like it's important for your elbows to move in front of your body, so that you're not hitting your sides. Okay, so just be aware that a lot of students tend to sit a little bit too close. I always feel like you should lean forward. Okay, now let's talk about what to practice. We've I heard Alan mention a lot about scales. Starting with pentascales, which is the basic 5-finger patterns, right? There are so many ways you can vary them. And I think somebody asked a question earlier about how to make scales interesting. So one of the best ways is just to provide variety so that they don't get bored. Okay, so you can vary the dynamics. You can maybe have one hand play loud, one hand play softer, switch hands, maybe do a crescendo to the top, diminuendo to the bottom, or vice versa. You can start loud, try to get softer to the top, louder to the bottom. Okay, unfortunately, I don't have a keyboard here in France to demonstrate, but we'll manage fine. You can vary the rhythms. Instead of playing all kind of quarter notes, you can many different rhythms. So I find I get the students to make up rhythms, and it's amazing. Sometimes they make up some that I've never thought of. So you can start with, quarter note 2/8, or vice versa, or a quarter note and a triplet, or 2/8, a quarter, and 2/8. Many possibilities. And then you can use clusters. So you could, for example, play, let's say, C major scale. So start with a C, and then play the D and the E together as a cluster. Okay, and then put your thumb under on the F, then play G, A, B as a cluster, and then play the top note. Or if they're doing 2 octaves, go farther. Okay, so basically it's thumb and then whatever other fingers together as a cluster, and then thumb and then cluster. Okay, they love that, and it kind of sounds like a cat walking on the piano. For more advanced or more adventurous students, you can try hands crossed. Okay, and of course, contrary motion is always easier, but it's very good to be able to do things this way as well as. Okay, so you start with contrary, and then start with similar motion, and then you could try cross hands, contrary motion, and cross hands, similar motion. Yeah, it works well. And I do this almost every day as a warm-up. I practice scales with my hands crossed. And then you can even try accelerating in the scale and then slowing down. They love that. So it's kind of like somebody's chasing you to the top, and then you slow down as you get to the bottom. Or you could start at the top and go to the bottom and then end at the top. Okay, that's also a really good way of practicing, so that you're starting at the top and ending at the top. Many different things. You can, in just a simple even pentascale, have them change one note. So instead of just C, D, E, F, G, all white notes, you could have them change one of the notes. So they might play maybe an E flat, or you might try an F sharp. So by basically making it more interesting, a little more variety, it helps them improve, and it keeps their interest. Okay, so you don't want them to get bored. One way of practicing arpeggios, I call it tick-tocks. Or actually, it doesn't even have to be arpeggios. It could be scales. And it just helps for the thumb under. So getting back to the clusters, okay, so you'd play a C, and then you'd put the D and E down. So you depress the D and E, and then you play the C, F, and your thumb just is moving from side to side, kind of like a tick, tock, tick, tock. And then in arpeggio, you could do the same thing. So you play, let's say, C major, C, E, G. So you'd play your thumb on the C, hold the G down. So hold your third finger down, play the C, middle C, and then play the higher C. So you're practicing just the thumb movement with the third finger being your anchor. Okay, if you have questions, I'll be happy to explain it more thoroughly later on. And another thing that you could do with students while they're playing even a scale is just have them march left, right, left, right. So on each note, they can, and again, it's all helping their coordination. And a lot of it is the lateral from left to right coordination between both sides of the body and both sides of the brain. Okay, so as they play a C, they could put their left foot down, and when they play the next note, it would be their right foot. So they're learning to coordinate their feet as well as their hands. Okay, so that's a little bit on what to practice, just dealing kind of with some basic technique. Most important is how to practice. And we talked about that earlier. I do encourage hand separate practice because I feel that you have to know what each hand is doing on its own. But you definitely need to put them together as soon as possible, but always take them apart. So it's like a combination of hands separate, hands together, hands separate, hands together. I like to, in terms of balance, I call it ghosting. There's many other terms for it, where if it's the left hand, you want to be soft and the right hand has the melody. Just the left hand just plays on the top of the key, so you don't hear anything. It just touches the surface of the keys, and the right hand plays normally. Okay, so you're kind of ghosting the left hand. Then you say to the student, okay, now you can let your left hand play normally. But what happens is they're so used to it being very light that they end up playing it really softly, which is what you're after. Once I had a student who I was trying to not tell him that his left hand was playing too loud. So I asked him, I said, Andrew, I'm having trouble hearing the right hand melody. What do you think could be the problem? To see if he could figure it out. And he said, well, Mrs. Athparia, there must be something wrong with your ears, because he obviously could hear his right hand, and he thought, if I can't hear it, there must be something wrong with my ears. But anyway, it just all relates back to the idea of balance is so important, especially for our instrument, because we're playing many parts at once. Okay, so ghosting is a great method. I also get students to draw the melody of a piece. So, just get a piece of paper and draw the shape of it. Okay, so you might take something like this, and it doesn't really matter if it's accurate or it's not. I don't know if you can see this, but basically, just so the idea of the pitch being lower and then being higher. So if you were starting lower and going up and down, and just to find out sort of where is the peak of the phrase, or where is the high note, and just kind of looking at the shape of it, the contour. And then you might compare that with a phrase later in the piece. Okay, so it just helps them with their visual understanding. And it also can help you figure out which note in this phrase do you love the most? Which one is the most important? What if we make this one the most important? And then, okay, let's try making another one more important. And you can always demonstrate. But it just kind of helps them see the shape of the melody. And I think, again, it's helping them relate notes to each other. Everything in life is about relationships. So find the contour. And it also helps them read by interval. So they're reading by shape and by relationship, as opposed to this is an E, this is a D. Okay, so what's the relationship between them? Somebody asked earlier about do you sing with your students? And I always do. Now, I know it's sometimes difficult, and children nowadays sing much less than they used to. But even with teenagers, it's really important, because singing is our natural instrument. We don't have to think about how to shape a phrase when you're singing. It just happens naturally. So what I do is I just tell my students, I don't have a good singing voice, but I'm going to sing really loud, and I'll sing with you. First time, they're a little bit shy. They don't want to sing, but usually by a second or third time, they've forgotten their shyness, and they usually will sing along with you, and it really helps. So I would encourage you, even though sometimes it's a struggle, I know, but I think we need to keep singing. Another way of practicing that's really effective is slow practicing. It's like putting a microscope under a drop of water or whatever, and slowing things down so that you can really figure out how to position your hand, or you can think ahead. It gives you lots of time, and especially with coordinating your hands. So slow practicing is very effective. I mentioned earlier a little bit about how to deal with mistakes. Somebody asked the famous pianist Vladimir Horowitz once why he was able to play so perfectly. And his answer was, because I don't practice mistakes, which is amazing, really. But it's true. He never played mistakes because he never practiced them. I always tell my students, try to be a detective when you're just like a detective in a store, trying to figure out. So it's not just what mistake I made, but why did I make it? And sometimes what happens, a student makes a mistake, then they will change the notes in both hands so that the one that was wrong plays the right note, but then the other hand plays something wrong. So you have to be detective, try to isolate. Okay, I forgot the F sharp. So why did I forget it? Okay, I didn't move my finger early enough. I wasn't in position. Or mentally, I wasn't thinking F sharp is coming soon enough. I thought about it after I played the wrong note. Sometimes I even will block the note F natural. So on the side of the piano, like on the very front of the key, I'll kind of discreetly, without them realizing it, I'll block it so that they cannot depress the F natural. So when they get to that note and their finger automatically wants to play an F natural, it just doesn't go down. Okay, and then that makes them realize, oh, that key doesn't work. Oh, and moves to the F sharp. Okay, so that's one way that I found works really well. Try not to keep making the same mistakes. It's sort of like, a computer screen that's getting dirtier and dirtier all the time, but we don't notice it because we just get used to it. So you don't want practicing to be like that. You don't want it to be like a screen that's getting, or glasses that are getting dirtier. Think about, am I over jumping or under jumping? Some people, when they play a scale, for example, when they put their thumb under, they go too far, or they don't go far enough and they play the same note. So try to this is like part of, again, being a good detective. Try to figure out, and as a teacher, you have to be a really good detective. So don't just correct mistakes. Try to figure out why they're making the mistake. That's really important. And as I mentioned, sometimes making a mistake is a good thing. Occasionally, it means that you're giving up precision for something that might be more important at that moment, like trying to play expressively or thinking about pedaling or something. Another thing I learned a long time ago, and it's one of the most effective ways to help play something the way you want to. It's a little game called Oscar, where the goal of the game is to play it 3 times perfectly. But if you make a mistake, you have to go back. So what I do is I get 3 pens or 3 loonies or whatever on one side of the piano. And then you play a short passage that's kind of a problem. And you make it as easy as possible. So it might just be 1.5 bars, or it might even be just one hand. Okay. And if you play it correctly, you get to move the the pen or the loonie or whatever to the other side. Okay, and then you play it again. If it's correct, you move it again to the other side. And then if you happen to make a mistake, it has to go back. So what it's trying to do is help you to concentrate enough to do it the way you want, the correct way, 3 times in a row. And I use it myself when I practice. It's extremely effective. It probably has other names too, but it just is a really good way of keeping track, and it makes you concentrate. And then, of course, you make the passage slightly more challenging. So maybe a little bit longer, maybe 2 hands, and so on. Okay. Another way to practice is eyes closed, so that you're feeling the keys, feeling the distance. So for some students, if your hands are growing, they may automatically stretch what they think is an octave, and maybe their hand has grown, and so it's actually too big. But eyes closed, you listen better, you feel the piano, you feel the relationships, and it helps us be aware of our bodies more. Another kind of interesting thing to do with dynamics sometimes is to, first of all, exaggerate. Okay, so give character. Don't just think loud and soft. That's boring. Give what kind of forte. Is it angry forte? Is it confident? Is it, just strong? Is it energetic? Whatever. There's many. You can make a list of at least 20 different kinds of fortes or pianos. So get a character involved, exaggerate. Then if you want to try something a little bit different, you could try opposite dynamics, but this would only be with a student that really has mastered what you want. Just to try, all the fortes piano, and again, just to make it interesting. You can also vary the octave. Sometimes just playing the same piece 1 octave higher, 2 octaves higher, 1 octave lower sounds totally different, and it just kind of cleans the ear palette. I always suggest creating interesting titles for pieces. A lot of studies, for example, are called Etude in C major. So I tell students, make up your title, and they're really good at it. They have great imagination, so they come up with all kinds of animals, interesting things, and then I always call that piece whatever title they give it. That's what I write in their book, and so on. And then you can also, maybe each little phrase in a piece could have a descriptive title or whatever. There's all kinds of things you can do. Keep, inventing stories. Think of what time of the year does this piece sound like, a winter piece, summer piece? Is it morning? Is it evening? Is it nighttime? What's the weather like? There's so many things you can use. Get their imagination going. And then it's amazing how the time will pass. They won't even realize they're practicing. And then one of the most practical things I use are little see-through sticky notes. You can buy them in any kind of Staples office supply store. And I use them they come in different colors. So I use them to highlight anything that you want the student to remember at home. So it could be an incorrect note that you want them to remember, to always play the E flat here. Or it could be a dynamic sign, or it could be anything. And you can color code. So you could, for example, all the note mistakes could be yellow. The nice thing about them, you can take them off. So they're like bandages. So if you don't need them, just take them off, okay? And it's always good. The student feels good when they can clear the page. Another thing you can do with them is you can use them to just start in different parts of the piece, so that you're not always starting at the beginning. So you can just at random put it anywhere on the piece, and then just try to start from that spot. So it's also good for their sight reading. They have to know what that note is and so on in that place. The last thing I want to say about technique that I think is the best sort of definition of technique, for me at least, is just being able to play anything you want with ease. And I think that should be our goal, so that we're trying to make playing the piano easy. So by practicing, we're trying to make things easier, not more difficult. And so that should always be your goal. And you're trying to make your mind intelligent. So you're thinking about the music, but you're also trying to teach your hands and your bodies to be intelligent too, and to combine that with our emotions. So just in summary, I think it's very important at the lesson to try to teach students how to practice at home, because as I said at the beginning, 6 days a week, they are their own teacher. So what I find effective sometimes is to have a silent 5 or 10 minutes at the lesson where you just observe them practicing. So you say, okay, June, I'm just going to pretend I'm not here. Okay, you're just at home. You've just come home from school and you're just starting to practice. Okay, so just pretend I'm not here. I'm just a silent observer. And then you watch them as they practice, and you can observe, are they, following the things you wrote in the book? Are they looking at the sticky notes? You can kind of watch their concentration, and you get a very good sense of how they practice at home. Then you can intersperse, some ideas like, did you remember to check what your left hand is doing here? And kind of you're basically guiding them how to practice. Focus, as I mentioned before, on one item at a time to improve, so that you don't overwhelm them. So just, take one item and just try to concentrate on it, and then another one. Listening is so important. Always keep aware of sounds around you. So listen at a lesson. You could maybe even listen to the doorbell, listen to the sound on your cell phone, car horns, birds, the pitch of a kettle boiling, all kinds of sounds that are in your home, just so that they get a little bit more tuned into the whole oral world. Attitude, be forgiving. We're human. It's hard to be perfect, but always aim for something that's a little bit beyond what you can do. Keep motivated. External motivations like charts, prizes help a lot of students, and they're great. But of course, the best motivation is internal. So if you can get them to really love the music, get excited about it, that's the best motivation to practice. And the last thing I'll just say, that as a teacher, keep practicing yourself. The very best way of motivating students is for them to come to their lesson and find you practicing. Or as I said, for parents to perhaps learn an instrument or to practice as well. So anyway, I hope I've given you even one or two little ideas that might be new that you might want to try out with your students. And I'd be very happy to answer any questions you have.
All right. Thank you so much, Colleen. I really enjoyed your talk as well. It looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. Oh, they're starting to come in. So we are running a little short on time, but I think everyone needs a break. So we'll do the Q&A, and we'll probably have a 5-minute break after this, and then we'll jump into Kathy's. So the first question is, have you ever encountered a parent that says they don't have enough time to support their child's practice week to week, or that their child can only handle practice 3 to 4 days a week? For example, how would you handle that if you hear that when you first interview the family versus if they bring this up a few months into learning?
Okay, it's a very good question. And yes, I think every teacher's encountered parents like that. I would just stress the importance of, if when you're learning music, you're learning a skill. It's like learning a new language, and or it's like even like brushing your teeth. It's something that if you don't do it every day, there's gaps and you really fall behind. So if you really want your child to progress, it's really important to try your best to find time, but allowing that, of course, there are a few days when they can't. I mean, it's natural, but again, if you want them just to really not improve, then it doesn't really matter, right? But I think most parents realize that, and compare it maybe to school, that if you really want to improve in math or whatever, you kind of have to do it every day, or else you forget. So I would talk about it for sure at the interview, and follow up. I mean, you can't force parents to, but I think if parents are aware how important it is, and maybe you could help them try to find time, even if it's 10 minutes, it's better than nothing.
All right. Now, a note to everyone asking questions: I will prioritize questions that only Colleen can answer, just because we are a little short on time. So the next question is: with TikTok arpeggio exercises, it seems like the wrist has much more freedom and room to wiggle up and down. What would wrist movement look like in this exercise?
Okay, it's a good question. I'll try to demonstrate just on my hand here. So basically, you want the wrist and the elbow to be free, okay, so that you're basically playing the thumb, and then you want the wrist to be laterally flexible, so that sideways. You don't want it to go up or down, so you just want to move it sideways. And to do that, you also want your elbow to be free. Okay, so sometimes we concentrate too much on the wrist. Maybe if you just think about the elbow, the wrist will do the right thing. Or sometimes you have to think about the wrist but just be sure that they're both loose and flexible.
All right. So the last question for this individual Q&A session will be Gabriella's question. How do you work through releasing tension in practice? And do you have any effective exercises? Tony, we will ask your question at the general Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, it's a really good question, and there's lots I could say. I find that this is one of the best. Just shoulders up and down, and then the other way, because most tension in pianists is in the shoulders and in the neck. And then I find that if you put your fingers behind your shoulder bone here and just rotate your head slowly, that really helps. And then the opposite hand. Okay, so that's just two very simple kind of shoulder exercises. There's also eye exercises, looking up, looking down, looking sideways. That's also really good, and it helps release tension. Some people get a lot of tension in the jaw. So again, just first of all, it's being kind of aware where there's tension, and then just taking frequent little breaks to try to release it. But I can maybe answer more one-on-one with anybody that's interested.